Okay, we're live. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Moreno, Marketing Director at Analytics 8, and I'll be hosting our discussion today on behalf of Analytics 8 on the topic of data and analytics spend optimization. And our guest today is our very own Tony Dahlager. Hi, Tony.
Hi.
For those of you listening in, if you haven't had the chance to meet or work with Tony before, Tony started with Analytics 8 9 years ago now as a consultant. And during his time here, he's worked with dozens of organizations across multiple industries to help them strategize and implement the best solutions so that they can do more with their data. So during your time at Analytics 8, you've quickly moved up the ranks from consultant, working with companies like Exxon and Anheuser-Busch, to leading teams of consultants. And today you are a managing director, leading our data management service line, which includes cloud architecture, and data engineering and integration. So that is why you are the ideal person to share your advice and insights on this topic today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jen. I think what's
All
cool
right.
about this format too is, we have no idea what folks are going to ask. So even if I can't answer your question, we have lots of wonderful, smart people behind the scenes too, who I'm sure will be helping to prop me up if we get one that's weird and out there. But yeah, good to be with everybody today.
Exactly. Okay, well, to kick things off, I wanted to first off ask you why we're talking about this topic today. Why do you think it's important that companies be thinking about this topic of data and analytics spend optimization right now?
Yeah, I think to me, um, organizations are facing a lot of challenges right now. So some are experiencing reductions in force or layoffs. Others are trying to just be conservative, just kind of anticipating and watching the market and not really being sure what's going on. There's a lot of noise, I think, about like what's going on in the market and what sort of optimism we should have. And I'm fairly optimistic still about what's going on in the marketplace today. But the reality is like most of our customers, if they're not facing economic headwinds, are trying to anticipate like ways that we can avoid having to make tough decisions about like talent strategy, reductions in force, and things like that, and look for places where we can just be more frugal and more practical about not wasting money on things that, frankly, aren't adding value, business value. And so, we started this kind of with a LinkedIn post that people really engaged with and seemed like it was like, okay, well, we're on to something here. And the conversation has just kind of evolved and evolved. And what we tried to do is think about this completely about like, how do we actually paint a picture of the sort of possibilities, the things that our clients are doing and we're helping them with to help them think about ways that they can just eliminate the waste that they have before they have to make bigger, harder decisions down the road and hopefully avoid that, right? By just finding space in your budget to still maximize the value you're giving with data and analytics and not have any waste.
Yeah, it's a complex topic, and I think it's something that many organizations are finding difficult to know where to begin these efforts. But you've given some real practical advice on how to do that, not by doing extreme things, not by slashing budgets, but by taking small steps or making tweaks, which can lead to real results and getting more of what's expected from those data and analytics investments. So within the company, you're kind of known as our technical translator of sorts, and you put together that very helpful 5-part video series, which covers what you believe are the 5 biggest opportunities to curb spend among your data and analytics activities. So I want to quickly recap those 5 areas here so we can kind of prime our audience for the Q&A. By the way, if you didn't have a chance to watch that video series, check it out on our YouTube channel. Also, we've been posting them from our LinkedIn account over the last couple of weeks. So, starting with priority number 1, you discussed cloud spend. So, can you tell us more about what you mean by this and how companies should be approaching optimization here?
Yeah. And to be clear, when we say cloud spend, we're talking about public cloud spend. So like, especially in 2020, organizations that even were like resistant to moving to the cloud did move a lot of workloads to the cloud to take advantage of not only, the elasticity and disaster recovery and high availability elements, but also like us at Analytics 8, I think there was like a router or something that somebody had to go into the physical office to like unplug to allow something to work for our email as a company or something. It was crazy. It was like we had to actually go into the Chicago office and reboot something because something wasn't working on a physical server. And for us, right, that was like an inflection point of, oh my gosh, we need everything to be in the cloud. What are we doing? Because if we have to go into the office to do something, that's not going to work, right? And so it kind of cleared that last barrier for people of the last remnant of what they had on prem moving to the cloud, where people started finally taking, like, more traditional organizations, financial services, started saying, okay, we need to be more responsive to the advancements in technology for that. And what happened is basically like many organizations kind of did a lift and shift. They didn't really think about re-architecting, but moved workloads the way they were running on premise into public cloud. And what's cool, right, is we've seen our customers especially try to move more towards serverless, avoid more of like platform as a service or infrastructure as a service, move more towards software as a service as much as possible, serverless technologies. But that's a big lift. It's like you have to re-architect, you have to rethink like how you're actually structuring your workloads at that point. And so for us, right, like we're talking about low-hanging fruit. It's like, well, the public cloud is very flexible. And so some of the questions we were kind of nudging people to think about is even simple things like, do you need your data analytics workloads to run 24/7 or not? And even just shutting things off outside of normal working hours or the weekends, or like not having data refreshed necessarily on Saturdays and Sundays, can lead to some pretty big cost reductions. And those aren't like, I have to move all my stuff to serverless. That's like in containers today and things like that. It's more basic. And I know that like some of you are like, duh, this is very basic. But like the reality is we find this everywhere. We find this at mature companies that think of to be very mature, and those that, are just starting off, that there's just waste like that. And so for me, right, like I want to try to find things that companies can do that doesn't require a huge project, but it's like, let's think about this practically and go to the business and negotiate basically like, hey, from a service level agreement perspective, we can just roll things back a little bit. That's a way for us to save pretty significant spend on some of the services we're leveraging. And frankly, like we were kind of even starting before that and just saying, got to have somebody that's looking at the bills that is knowledgeable about the services to be able to look for those low-hanging fruit opportunities. And so we gave some practical ideas for that, but really that one is just so low-hanging fruit. And again, one that we find sometimes that ends up paying for some of our projects. When we talk about like a 29% cost reduction or up to 66% cost reduction if you're not running it 24/7, like those pay for other engagements and things like that. So that's just a very easy area to start, to kind of start the conversation and break open kind of the mindset of how we can maybe look at ways to curb costs when we need to pull back to our minimum viable solution for our organization.
Great. Thank you for that. And so the second topic you cover is maybe perhaps a little bit more complex, but again, you do a great job of breaking it down into very approachable terms. The second topic was what you call data transportation costs. Can you give us a definition of what you mean by that and tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, and our CTO, Patrick, is the one that came up with data transportation costs. I don't know if you found it somewhere, but I think he got tired of me saying data extraction, ingestion, replication. We just were using a lot of words for this. It's basically data that lives in other applications, be it enterprise applications or cloud applications. In order to be able to analyze that data effectively together, it's helpful to take that and move it somewhere centrally. There's other architectural paradigms where they can be more distributed and stuff, but a lot of our customers are still moving data together in the same place. And so the idea of transporting data from your enterprise applications to a central place where you can actually blend them together and generate insights that gives you a more holistic picture of your business, those have costs, big costs associated with them. And especially recently with Databricks and BigQuery and Snowflake, it's been a lot easier to actually move all that data in one place and be able to have performance and scale with that. So organizations were moving all of their data there, whether or not it was in use, like whether or not there was actually demand for it. We're refreshing it constantly. And those services to refresh that data oftentimes are based on the number of rows that you're replicating. as opposed to like capacity models of pricing, which is like more common in the past, or maybe fixed prices for that software. And so some of our customers were calling us basically saying like, "Hey, our bill for data transportation costs tripled this month, and we don't know why. We don't know what happened. It's triple, and we can't have that because that's a quarter of our budget for the year for that service that now has that issue." And so this was kind of the post that got it all started, was basically to say we need to be very pragmatic about how you're moving data to this central data repository. Like think about what data you're moving, and think about the considerations from a licensing perspective or from your contract models that you have with these third-party vendors, and make sure you're matching those to the right data source. For some of them, like a row-based replication model is awesome. It's almost free for some of the different data volumes you have for some of the connectors for certain technologies, right? When it scales up or gets really huge, you have to work with those vendors and make sure you're using the right tools and contract models to limit that cost as much as possible. And so, again, that was one where it's just like, we gave a bunch of ideas there about like what we've been telling customers basically for that is, if you have small data volumes that don't need to be replicated all the time, using those third-party tools is great because it can actually help you save money in your total cost of ownership. When you get to like larger enterprise sort of applications you're having to replicate from, some companies are trying to roll their own connectors, like build them from scratch. And there's tools out there that do that for you. Again, it's just trying to help people think about the total cost of these tools and trying to balance, right? Like sometimes there are simpler, more cost-effective solutions that require more time to manage. Other times you're going to benefit by basically moving the management of those services off to these software companies instead. And for me, it was just to say, for a lot of our customers, there's not one pattern that works for everybody within a single organization. Sometimes they have to have 2 patterns, sometimes 3 patterns to be able to manage their costs effectively. And I know vendors are like working through this and trying to find ways to be more pragmatic about it. And so again, it's like really good to go talk to them. If you're already engaging with one of them, go talk to them, explain to them your problem, see if they have a creative solution you might not be aware of either, in that to get a little more predictability in those costs too. That can be helpful.
It's great. Yeah, that post really took off. So clearly it resonated with a lot of people. Okay, so the third area that you believe companies should be focused on is optimizing their centralized cloud data platform. So these platforms, they're powerful. They've become central to organizations really taking their enterprise data services to the next level, but they can come at a cost. So what's a smart way for people to approach this to optimize without losing the performance that they now expect?
Yeah, again, I think it's similar to the data transportation cost piece of it, which is make sure the data is actually being used, make sure you have a good understanding of the demand for data. Sometimes we were seeing customers like brag about like how many tables they replicated to their central data platform as like some success criteria, which made no sense. It was like, you're not even using a tenth of those. Like, why are you having all of that data reside there kind of just in case? Sometimes that makes sense, right? But for me, right, again, if we're trying to think about our minimum viable data stack, only refreshing that data that is actually being used is kind of a wise way to help just limit how much you're actually spending on those platforms. So again, it's not necessarily to say for everyone, right? Like there's one right way to do that, but more to say like you need to identify like what your minimum viable data stack is within your modern data stack, and think about it from a consumption, like a demand perspective, to help control your costs in that. And then on top of that, there's like alerting and policies you can create, and different groups. There's tons of different technologies that have sprung up around that to make that easier. But at the end of the day, right, like being able to have visibility to that, having good sound settings about how to suspend those workloads when they're not in use, and making sure that you're thinking about what data is actually necessary. Like those are the kind of basics for that. And again, it's kind of the same pattern as the data transportation costs there.
Yeah. And when you say minimum viable data stack, I mean, to be clear, that's not a negative term. It's just being more practical about what you need now. And then you can always add on and roadmap as you need more functionality.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what you would need to get started. It's kind of like how we think about it typically from an implementation perspective, and we add on stuff as you grow in complexity and need. And what we're talking about here is like, how do you strip it down to basically a keep the lights on sort of model? Well, you go back to that foundational element that actually helps you, meet the demands of the business. And it's going to look different for every organization, but it's like you have to like kind of know in the back of your head, like when we do family budgeting, right? It's like we have an emergency fund, and we know what our absolute have to costs. Like we're not going to go out to eat if we needed to strip all of our costs down to the minimum budget. It's like in the same way you think about your data stack that way. Like what are the things that are nice to have but not fundamental to the spend that you're doing to drive the business forward with data still. And it's the same concept for that.
Yeah. Yeah, so that plays into the fourth opportunity that you see is costs associated with the various technologies that companies adopt as part of their data stack. So they all have important functions and play important roles. How do you keep those costs in check? I'm assuming the answer is pretty similar to the previous couple of sections.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, right, is like you think about all the third party technologies that sprung up around these central data platforms and within the cloud. Like the overlap is what's interesting. Some of
Mm-hmm.
the same tools that we see deployed side by side do the same things as other tools within the existing organization. And again, it's like not necessarily thinking about re-architecture, but it is helpful to think about like, is there one that's more cost effective than the other? If we have a best of breed approach, like it might make sense to consolidate down to one. It might make sense to leave both in place because it's cheaper to run this part of this tool and that part of that tool. And so again, like what we try to do is lay out the capabilities of those tools on like a data lifecycle picture, basically to say what makes sense as an architecture pattern here from that minimum viable data stack perspective, and then make sure it's clear to everyone like we're using this tool for this purpose, we're using this tool for this purpose, and then in the future, right, if there's things where there's enhancements and things that you can add in, great, then you've got both there. But it's eliminating some of that duplicative effort that's happening in two different places. That's the opportunity there. Again, that's like a better option because it's not necessarily low hanging fruit because you might have to re-architect stuff. But that's another one where we found ways to save money. And then the other part of that is like people kind of rush their technology strategy sometimes. They buy the tools even before they get used. I'm not going to say any categories because it's not fair to pick on any. There's every tool has a tendency towards this sometimes. But like honestly ask yourself, is this actually adding value to our organization? Are we actually using it? We really want to. It's like an aspirational data stack as opposed to your minimum viable stack. And it's like if you haven't used it in a year and a half, like nobody's using it. Call that vendor and see if there's a way to put that contract on hold, or if you need to, right? Like, you know, not renew. That'd be like worst case scenario, but like, be realistic about where you're at in that journey. Be willing to have those conversations with the vendors again.
Yes, it reminds me of my closet. If I haven't worn something in a year, do I actually still really need it?
Yeah, or that like pesky third streaming service that stays on your credit card bill every month. Yeah.
Exactly. Cool. Okay. And the fifth area that you covered is the role of talent. So, specifically, costs associated with contractors, consultants, and managed service providers. So, tell us what's important to keep in mind here.
Yeah. So again, to me, this is kind of the elephant in the room from a talent strategy perspective. Like, I think people think, you know, if people costs are our biggest cost, let's start there with layoffs. And our whole point is like, hey, you got waste. Probably a lot of places in your organization that you should look first. Have ways to try to make sure that you can take care of your employees and stuff. And for some organizations, right, they do leverage contractors, consultants, managed services providers to be able to have that flexibility, right? And for us, what we're trying to say here is when you're going to introduce consultants or contractors, how do you think about them as part of your team? What kinds of things would you expect them to be doing as opposed to the people in-house? And I know this is kind of like, I kind of joked in one of the videos, like the fox in the hen house, like, let me have a consultant tell us why we should buy consulting. But in some ways, like we work with enough companies who have multiple vendors engaged. Like we get to see all of our competition and what they're doing and how they're behaving and all that stuff all the time. And so, like, am I passionate about how analytics 8 does consulting? Yes. And I'm like, obviously, that's my job to be our cheerleader for that and to encourage our consultants to behave in ways that are with integrity and trying to take the mindset of doing the best thing for our clients. But for me, right, it's like making sure in the modern data stack, like a bunch of people can get stuff spun up really quickly. They can run those costs up, and they haven't done it before. And we find these stacks that just look, they're misshapen or disheveled. It's like, it seems like somebody just kind of read a blog and then bought a bunch of, like, recommended a bunch of technologies. And so for me, it's just to say, hey, if you're going to go through a process of re-architecting or looking at that, it's helpful to have the perspective of somebody who's actually done that before and navigated it before and help you find like the places where there's wiggle room and the places where you shouldn't necessarily move certain technology patterns or architectures around. And again, like one of the benefits, this is kind of funny, right? But like I've worked with one of our customers for 7 years. I'm the only person left that was there from 7 years ago. Like consultants can actually be a way to help maintain some consistency in an organization in terms of knowledge capture. Like that's not by design. Nobody wants that. Like if the only person that has the knowledge is a contractor or a consultant. But there is a benefit in having that shared knowledge. Just like on this call, right? If we get stuck in a question or somebody asks something crazy, I have a whole pool of people behind me that I can ask. You're not just dealing with me, you're dealing with everybody at Analytics 8 who's supporting me behind the scenes. And all of our consultants have that. So again, it's more just think about when you're thinking about your contractors, be thinking about things not just in terms of like what their hourly rate is, but thinking about the value of the services they're providing, and think about the experience they're bringing and making sure that they've actually been there and done that. And if they haven't, making sure that they tell you they haven't been there and done that before. Those are things like they're good signs to look for in this time, especially when people are looking for creative ways to accomplish the same thing with less.
Absolutely. You also mentioned time zones in your video. Could you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, I think there's always a tendency to say, let's take advantage of globalization, global teams when we're trying to reduce costs. And the big thing for that I just try to help educate people with is to think about what work you're doing that requires synchronicity between time zones. Like if I have to talk to a human being, if you move something to a time zone that's offset by 12 hours, you're making the lives miserable of everybody on both ends of that of the phone or of the web meeting. And so there's definitely work that can be done asynchronously where you don't necessarily need to be talking all the time. And that's great work to be able to take advantage of globalization. But I think companies are quick to just say like, oh, we got a rate cut. So let's just move everything to another offshore place where the rates are cheaper. And they don't think about the costs of potentially having multiple days of communication back and forth while you're sorting things out because you don't have any time zone overlap between teams. So it's just to say, think about synchronicity and the work that you're doing that requires like that direct communication to be able to make progress versus the stuff that you can kind of pile up as a workload and hand off to be done asynchronously when you're thinking about how to make take advantage of globalization in your rate structures for contractors and stuff. Again, it's common sense. It's not like, wow, I joined this LinkedIn webinar and learned that time zones matter. But like behaviorally, we see this still. So it's like, it is common sense. It does seem obvious, but I don't think the work is always classified correctly of like, no, data analytics, some of the work definitely is plumbing and can be done without a lot of communication. And other work is 100% dependent on constant communication. And you have to be able to split like what type of workload is this when you're thinking about moving it to different countries and such.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's important to just take a step back and assess if that is actually impacting your work. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. Okay, so those are the 5 topics at a very high level. I want to give people an opportunity to put their questions for you in the chat now.
Now the fun part.
Yeah. Something I want to ask you while we wait is I'm curious with, organizational budgets being scrutinized and people getting perhaps these surprise bills from their cloud providers. Are you seeing any trends from our clients wanting to move their workloads back on prem?
I think there's been a lot of talk in that. Now, like right before, like I don't know exactly when this came up, but like the concept of edge computing has come up for us. We've had customers asking us about it and such. And like, that's a real, that's a very real thing. That's not necessarily for cost savings. That's more for performance and for enabling more real time use of data. So that's very real. Like people moving physical hardware closer to like telemetry data, like to the machines themselves, or and having like a web basically to manage all those computers. Like awesome. That's a very different thing than saying like we're going to go buy a bunch of servers and set up our data center again. That feels extreme and maybe like a lot of talk. I think it is reflective though of like people are kind of tired of not having a great plan going into the cloud and being surprised by the outcome. Because I think a lot of people talked about like, hey, the cloud's going to save us money, and sometimes that's true, and other times that's a bold-faced lie. If somebody says that for something, it's like more expensive, but you get the benefit of being able to scale it up quickly or scale it back. And so you have to look at that like realistically. But I think some of it is just fatigue. I might be wrong, but that's kind of my perspective on like where our customers are at. I don't have customers that are going back and rebuilding data centers at this point that I'm aware of. I've not talked to one yet. But edge computing is definitely popping up, and that's more of like when they're talking about on-prem, that's kind of what they're saying. Let's keep data closer to where it's being used and where it's being generated, rather than bringing it all into a public cloud centrally. That's real. That's a trend, but that's different than just building a data center.
Okay.
Or rebuilding a data center.
Um,
Ours is full of broken down cubes and a bunch of boxes of training manuals that I don't want to look at. So I do not want Analytics 8 to rebuild our data centers. Please. It's a lot of spring cleaning.
okay. What about, do you see a benefit of taking a multi-cloud approach?
Yeah, actually, this came up in the last week. We had a customer talking about that. They were coming to me, though, to tell me their legal team did not like that, that they were making multiple copies of data across multiple regions and across multiple cloud providers because of the risk footprint that it was creating for them. So, like, again, some organizations are thinking, like, let's de-risk our investment in one public cloud provider, because if they pull the string on us for costs and all of a sudden they jack up the prices, now we're left kind of holding the bag. And I think that is a little tinfoil hat society. But I understand why people think that way. I think it's much better to think about when you're adding third-party technologies to your stack, like which ones play nicely across the three cloud providers. That's a good way to think about that problem. I would not just diversify your cloud from a cost savings perspective, though. But there's a lot of reasons why you do it from a feature functionality perspective, especially in the merger and acquisition area, like when companies acquire companies. I don't know how often they think like, are they on the same cloud as us? I actually have a feeling they don't, based on the number of companies we have where they acquire a bunch of companies and now they're on all three clouds and have to think about how do they patch it all together. It seems to be more of an accidental thing than an intentional thing from what I've seen from a strategy perspective. But there's a lot of ways to manage that well and to make sure that you're taking advantage of the benefits of some of the cross-cloud functionality that exists within third-party technology now. So there's good things with that. I would not like lean into that as a strategy, though, necessarily.
Okay. Sharon has an interesting question. What role does data governance play in controlling data and analytics costs?
Oh, this is good. So my colleague Natalie is our data strategy service line lead from a managing director perspective, and I'm going to do my best Natalie impression.
We'll have her join the next one, by the way.
No, that's awesome. That's great. Put her on the spot. I'll send in questions about data engineering. So to me, data governance is a often misused term, and it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So the value that data governance has in controlling costs, there are direct costs associated with bad data, either in terms of wrong information, like duplicate information. There are indirect costs that come from bad decision making from that bad data. And so literally just knowing where data is, who to call when the data is wrong, and who is responsible for fixing it can improve data quality. And that can help with those direct and indirect costs from that perspective. There's also the element of compliance, which is a risk associated cost that people do not often take into account in terms of the math. In the same way of like, people that, build large businesses on the back of like risky loans and things like that. Well, like, yeah, the math works out until it doesn't. And so governance is one of those things that can help from a policy perspective, from a clear ownership perspective, to mitigate risk in an organization. And oftentimes the disastrous consequences that happen when you're not managing risk, because they're low probability, the cost savings seems to be small, right? But it's like you always wish you had it in hindsight. And so we try to make sure that companies have a pragmatic view towards governance and look at like what's absolutely necessary for them to be successful. And again, like there's just like buying insurance isn't necessarily fun, and like doesn't necessarily have a direct impact always. It's really nice when something happens and you have it. But there are, like, from a quality perspective, immediate return on investments for governance if you're thinking about it correctly and taking a very practical approach. So that's my best Natalie impression, and you can look for another call with her.
Yeah, we'll get her to weigh in. I think that was
Yeah.
good. Okay, well, we are a minute past time, so we're going to wrap it up here. If anyone has additional questions that they want to ask, please message Tony, message the company. We'll make sure that they get routed to Tony and get answered. Also be on the lookout for some additional resources on this topic outside of the video series we have. Our newsletter on our website is another great resource for advice and tools to help companies transform their business with data. So you can sign up for that on our website at analytics8.com. Thank you for your time today, Tony. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to doing this again soon.
Thanks, Jen.